This is Placate with Classic Offensive News. It is February 27th, 2025. There's some news about Classic Offensive. It's more so about a standalone release that is probably going to be the way in which this mod releases initially, at least. Currently, Classic Offensive has been denied by Steamworks for some unknown reason. Valve has not addressed the situation. They've stayed quiet. And so because of that, we've been sort of just waiting for Valve to respond. Recently, they came out with the TF2 SDK, and that is a really good sign for TF2. But not for CSGO. I think we held out a little bit of false hope for that, and we have to face the reality that this thing is probably not coming out. They're probably not going to release a CSGO SDK for a number of reasons. This is speculation, but we've got to stop holding out false hope. Reason number one, if you look at TF2's history, it makes a lot more sense for them to release a TF2 SDK as opposed to a Counter-Strike Go SDK. TF2 kind of just shot itself in the foot with how it implemented competitive. Watch this video for more information, but the long and short of it is that they listened to a very small minority of hyper-competitive players. They tried to balance the competitive players' wants with their want to keep the game relatively the same in terms of item usage and so on, and they created an unholy matrimony of TF2 competitive and casual, and it just didn't work out. They basically killed their own game, and this was around the time when CSGO and Dota 2 were both becoming bigger and bigger esports products. So if TF2 couldn't become an esport, they sort of just didn't care, and they started just using TF2 as a testing ground for things. And after those updates and after the player base didn't really grow that much, they just sort of left TF2 in the rice fields, ground zero, realm zero, edge of Omniverse. And that's where it's been for a long while. So it makes a lot more sense for Valve to think, okay, well, if the community wants to do community stuff, they can go do community stuff. Fuck them. Just release the TF2 SDK. We're wiping our hands clean of TF2. Don't care. Let the community make their own games. And we'll also add a read-only version of the inventory such that people can still use their inventories within TF2 mods, and they can still feel like they have some sort of status over other people if they give us money and get cool hats and stuff. Valve is hoping that mods will think, in order to attract a bunch of users, you should probably look to implement the inventory system so that people can have the inventory that they're used to in TF2 and they don't feel like they have to jump over to an entirely new thing. So basically, Valve just came out with a way to create easy money. This wasn't completely about modders and about stuff like that. The profit incentive had to come first. And I think it's going to be the same thing for the CSGO SDK, and that's why it's never going to be released, because currently CS2 is such a massive game that it doesn't make sense to create a little hub for disenfranchised players. Even if they had a read-only version of the inventory, it doesn't make sense because Classic Offensive isn't going to be using that, and Classic Offensive is the biggest CSGO mod. And then with other mods, it doesn't matter anyway because most people are playing CS2. It's not like they would gain that many more players if they released the SDK and allowed people to create mods easily. So anyway, my point is that there's very little incentive for Valve to push a CSGO SDK, and whatever, fine. Let's stop giving that false hope. And by the way, that's only the first reason. There's a second reason behind why a CSGO SDK might not make viable sense. Currently, the Steam version of Classic Offensive that's been retired by Valve, specifically Steamworks, for no discernible reason, is 8 gigabytes. CSGO is 22 gigabytes. So what happened? So basically, Zool took these CSGO files, modded the fuck out of them to create a Classic Offensive along with the Classic Offensive team, and then got rid of all the unnecessary junk like skins and whatever else, right? Brought it down to 8 gigabytes. Now, what would happen if a CSGO SDK came out? Well, based on how it currently works with Team Fortress 2, Zool would need to go and basically shave off any of the files that are not Classic Offensive specific files, and Zool and team are fine with doing that. It's whatever. So anyway, beyond that little bit of extra work that they would need to do, as a player, you would also need to download the code-specific files and CSGO. It's kind of a slap to the face because Zool spent a lot of time whittling down the game to 8 gigabytes, but whatever, fine. You have to download this 22 gigabyte game on top of the co-files. It's not that bad. Well, here's where it gets worse. Currently, the way that it might hypothetically work is that you would need to download CSGO, which is bundled with CS2, so you would also need to download CS2. 76 gigabytes of unnecessary files in this hypothetical world in which a CSGO SDK exists and a hypothetical version of Classic Offensive less the core CSGO files is uploaded to Steam. In this hypothetical world, that is a lot of unnecessary data that people will need to be downloading, and I don't think the mod would be viable if it were to be put out that way. A good number of people who are interested in Classic Offensive are people who can't run CS2, and part of that is the file space. It's 46 gigabytes, which is insane considering the little amount of content that's in the game. It's insane. And listen, I feel people who don't have the hard drive space for that. I used to be someone who had a 250 gigabyte hard drive, like a C drive, that had 1 gigabyte free, and I kept having to delete temp files, run CCleaner. I had to do the whole 9 yards every time I needed to update Windows. I fucking remember those days, man. And I used to have 2 like additional internal hard drives on my machine, and they would be at like 10 gigabytes each, maybe. So man, like, I completely understand that kind of player, and this just wouldn't be viable for them, this hypothetical situation. Listen, you can download CSGO itself without downloading CS2. Maybe in this hypothetical world in which a CSGO SDK releases, you can just do that, but you would need to use the console. You wouldn't be able to do that through the GUI, as far as I'm aware, in Steam. So anyway, basically, it would require a little bit of extra work from the users as well, and you have to realize that the average user doesn't want to do that kind of work. The average user wants to click that nice install button and then click that nice green play button. So Classic Offensive's player base would take a hit if you would need to do all that. But again, this is all like speculation. This is all la la land. None of this matters. The reality is that at this point, the Classic Offensive team is done waiting. Zool said he's not going to leave this project on his hard drive for a number of years longer. He's releasing this. He wants this project done and over with. The team will support it over the years. But yeah, their current plan is to play around with how they might release the game standalone. You know, this is speculation. Did not hear any of this from Zool or team. You know, they might have a standalone launcher with the current game files. If Steam breathes down their neck, maybe they create a patcher that patches existing game files. Who knows what they do? They're playing around with current options, and then when they land on something that makes sense, they'll release a statement saying that that's the path that they'll go down. Wait for a response from Valve. If they receive nothing, just go ahead with releasing the mod. That's the current state of affairs. Waiting for Valve to respond is a fool's errand. Oops. I did that for 27 days. But anyway, so yeah, that's the current plan. The hope is that this is just a temporary measure to have the game be standalone, and that eventually Steam will come around and allow the mod to release on Steam in the same way that TF2 Classic was allowed to release on Steam after the release of the TF2 SDK. Clearly, Steam does not care about mods releasing outside of Steam. TF2 Classic was able to do it. If trying to release the legitimate way isn't the way to go, then fuck it. Maybe Classic Offensive does need to prove itself by creating its own website and creating its own core player base before Valve takes it seriously and tries to find a legitimate way to bring it onto Steam. That's the hope anyway, that this project goes the way of TF2 Classic and that it releases standalone, proves itself, and then Steam finally takes notice and then finds some way to accommodate the game and publish it. Whether that be a CSGO SDK or just allowing the game to be uploaded as is, who knows? But yeah, that's basically it. If you want to stick around and hear me rant about Valve, because for some reason I did that in my 2 prior takes that I've done over the course of the past 2 days, stick around, I guess. You know, if you don't care for that, this has been the news. Bye-bye. But I do also want to state that I've been wrong. I've been lying to you. I didn't yoink this idea from Elden Ring news, as I've been saying in the description of every single one of these videos. Turns out that I've actually been yoinking this idea from Hazard Time's Half-Life 3 update videos. He's been at this for like thousands of days, and I knew about this. I fucking remember this from a long time ago. I don't know why my brain blanked and thought, oh yeah, Elden Ring news was the first guy to do this. No, it was Half-Life 3 update. So anyway, turns out that I was wrong. I'll be linking both of them in the description below because I did remember Elden Ring news and start this project based off of that. Half-Life 3 is a bit further into my subconscious. Yeah, anyway, I lied to you. Turns out that I actually stole this idea from someone else. Anyway, enjoy the Valve rant. So therefore, the question needs to be asked. Do Zool and the team just say, fuck it? You know, we're tired of playing by the rules. Playing by the rules has done us nothing. TF2 Classic got a public Steam page before Classic Offensive, and they used leaked source code. So is it even worth it to play by the rules anymore? In one of my previous videos, I got a comment that kind of irked me. It was like, Steam is a great platform and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yes, I agree. They are an amazing service. You know why? Because piracy is a service problem, and that is what they sought to fix. Back before Half-Life 2, you would buy a Valve game and you would own it. You would own all the content on that disc. Not the actual intellectual property, but you would be able to play the game on your computer, no problems. You bought the game, therefore you have the right to play it. I'm pretty sure that there's even laws that protect people in the event that they want to duplicate the data for themselves. Let's say as a preventative measure in the event that you scratch your disk in the future. I'm pretty sure that there are consumer protection laws that allow you to do that. Enter Half-Life 2, a humble little game made by a humble little indie company that forced you to install Steam and download the game through there. At the time, everyone was pissed off by it, but after a little bit of people using Steam and getting to know it, there was convenience to it. But basically what Steam did was it acted and acts as a licensing layer that prohibits you from playing a game unless it can verify over the internet that you do in fact own a license for that game. You own a license now. You do not own your game. They changed the wording of the user license. You do not own your games. You own a license. Yes, I think that Valve is great at providing a service that is very predictable and easy to use. I don't think that they are great at doing things for the user. And this is clear with the TF2 Classic situation and Classic Offensive getting left in the dust. You know, it's all about money. It's just whatever is most profitable. Let's try this avenue with TF2. It's a dying game anyway. Who cares? Classic Offensive, you know, we've still got some life in Counter-Strike 2. We can milk some more out of that while doing the absolute bare minimum. Fuck it. We're not going to care about Classic Offensive. Just ignore it. It's too much hassle. It goes beyond that. It goes to the DRM, the fact that you don't own your games, and that's why I was promoting GOG, because you do own your games on GOG. No DRM. That is good for the user. You know, if GOG ever goes down, I can rest easy knowing that all my games are stored in my server. With Steam, I don't know about that. You know, I might have my games on one computer, but what if that computer dies or something like that, you know? So anyway, the point is that I think Steam provides a good service, and that is what they sought to do. I don't think that they are consumer friendly. That is the word I'm looking for. And I think that this whole situation with Classic Offensive proves that once and for all. Valve does not give a shit about the end user unless it feeds their bottom line, which makes sense. They're a company. You know, that's just how they act. That's just, you know, it makes sense. I'm just trying to get some people out of that delusional state where they believe that, oh, Valve has my best interests at heart and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, creating SteamOS and Proton compatibility layer and all this stuff, you know what it does? It allows them to have a complete stranglehold over gaming. You know, if SteamOS becomes big and bigger than Windows for gaming, then that means that Valve has control over the platform. In the same way that Android is free and open source, and it allows Google to install the Google Play Store onto every single Android device that exists. Well, almost. Not mine, but, you know, almost every single Android device that exists. But yeah, basically that's Valve's goal with Proton compatibility and Linux and all this stuff. It's not about providing Linux gamers with a superior experience and caring about free and open source. No, they want Steam automatically installed on every single machine that's used for gaming, because every single machine that's used for gaming it just has SteamOS installed, or the person felt like installing SteamOS on it. That's what they want. So anyway, the point is, at the end of the day, there are often times where Valve's interests align with the interests of the end consumer. It's a very happy coincidence that it happens a lot, but there are other times where it doesn't. Valve should be treated as a company in the same way that every other company is treated. Praised when they do something that is good for the end consumer, and shamed when they do the opposite. They are not a humble little indie company. That is not the case. Anyway, this has been Classic Offensive News for February 27th, 2025.